Okay, ready to dive into something we all kind of try to avoid? Failure. But what if we could actually get better at it?
Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today.
We're tackling Amy Edmondson's book, Right Kind of Wrong, and it's all about the science of failing well. Not just, dodging mistakes, but actually learning from them.
Yeah, I mean, everyone messes up, right? But we often miss out on what we could learn from it.
Totally.
Okay.
This book gets into how our brains are basically hardwired to freak out when we make mistakes.
Right, like even little slip-ups can feel huge sometimes.
Exactly. And it's
Yeah.
like, why? Why does my heart race when I, you know, mispronounce a word or something?
Well, it goes way back. Think about our, way back when ancestors.
Caveman days.
Basically. Back then, if you got rejected from the group, it could be, well,
Curtains?
yeah, pretty much. No food, no protection. So we evolved to be super sensitive to screwing up.
I guess it makes sense. Even if nowadays it's more about like feeling embarrassed than actual survival.
Right, but that feeling is intense. It's connected to something called loss aversion. The idea is that losing something, even something small.
Feels way worse than gaining the same thing would feel good.
Exactly. Like losing 20 bucks hurts way more than finding 20 bucks feels good.
Yeah, I feel that.
Edmondson actually has this great anecdote in the book. It's about a 3-year-old kid in the car with his dad.
Oh, I think I remember this one. The dad bumps the mirror, right?
Yeah, and instantly the kid yells, "It wasn't me!"
It's like that blame shifting is built in from like day one.
Right. It shows how deep this need to protect ourselves goes, even when we're not really at fault.
But okay, back in the caveman days, maybe that instinct kept us alive.
Sure, but today, it might be holding us back. Big time.
So how do we move past that? Edmondson talks about these 3 types of failure, and this is where things get really interesting.
He breaks it down into intelligent failures, basic failures, and then complex failures.
Each one has its own quirks, I guess.
And getting the difference is key to failing well.
Okay, so let's start with those intelligent failures. I like the sound of those already.
Those are the ones that happen when we're pushing boundaries, trying new things, experimenting.
So like the stumbles we make when we're trying to learn something totally new.
Exactly. It's about being curious, trying new things, accepting that setbacks are just, part of the deal.
I'm trying to think, have you ever tried something totally brand new and nailed it on the first try?
Honestly, no
Me
way.
neither. The first time I tried to bake bread.
Hmm.
Oh man, what a disaster.
But you probably kept trying, right?
I did, yeah. And eventually the bread wasn't, a total brick.
See, that's intelligent failure in action.
Not about being reckless, but being willing to step out of that comfort zone and being okay with making mistakes along the way.
Exactly. Okay, so now for the maybe less fun ones.
Basic failures.
Those are the ones where, we kind of should have known better.
Oh, yeah. Slipping up because we weren't paying attention or got a little too confident.
Things like that. Or maybe just not following the rules, even though we know them.
Ugh. Like that time I completely spaced on sending a super important email.
Been there. And they can be costly, too. Remember that Citibank thing?
The one where they wired almost $1 billion to the wrong place?
Yeah, loosey-daisy.
Yeah, a pretty huge example of a basic failure.
Shows that even when we're doing things we do all the time, those slip-ups can happen.
I guess the key is learning from them so we don't keep repeating the same mistakes.
Exactly. Think about it. Have you ever had something like that happen where a small oversight turned into a big problem?
Oh, all the time. Forgetting to set my alarm, missing a turn while driving because I'm distracted.
It's a good reminder to, pay attention and double-check things. Now, the third type, the complex ones.
Complex failures. Those sound a little intimidating.
They can be tricky. These are the ones that happen because of a bunch of different things all interacting, often in complex systems.
So like one thing leads to another and before you know it, bam, major problem.
Exactly. Edmondson uses the Torrey Canyon oil spill as an example. It wasn't just one person's mistake. It was a whole chain of events, navigational errors, mechanical issues, communication breakdowns.
Like a domino effect.
Yeah, and it all led to this huge environmental disaster.
It's like that scene in a movie where everything starts going wrong and you just want to yell at the screen, don't do that.
Right. But in real life, it's rarely that clear-cut. It's usually a bunch of little decisions and events that snowball into something massive.
And our instinct is to, like, find someone to blame. But that might not be the best way to handle it.
Nope. Focusing only on blame can actually stop us from seeing the bigger picture and from really understanding the whole system and how different parts
It's like
interact.
staring at one tree when the whole forest is on fire.
Exactly. Another example is the Hyatt Regency walkway collapse. A small design change, miscommunication, not enough oversight, and
Tragedy.
it really highlights how sometimes it's less about pointing fingers and more about understanding how everything fits together, all the complexities.
Okay, so we have these three types of failure, but how do we actually start, you know, changing our mindset about it?
That's where self-awareness comes in. Edmondson really emphasizes this. How we think about failure affects how we deal with it.
I know for me, whenever I make a mistake, I either get super defensive or just try to ignore it and hope it goes away.
That's really common, and it ties into this idea of fixed mindset versus growth mindset. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, it's like some people think their abilities are set and others think they can always learn and improve.
Exactly. Someone with a fixed mindset sees a failure as proof they're just bad at something.
But someone with a growth mindset sees it as like a challenge, right?
Exactly. A chance to learn and get better. And Edmondson argues that this growth mindset is crucial for failing well.
So instead of thinking, I'm terrible at this, I should be thinking, okay, what can I learn from this to do better next time?
Exactly. It's about seeing failure as a stepping stone, not a roadblock.
This reminds me of that story in the book about Jeffrey and the bridge game. He kept messing up and getting discouraged, but then he took a course on self-counseling.
And he realized his belief that he should be instantly good at bridge was just, well, kind of ridiculous.
Right, it's a game. It takes time to learn.
He started to see his mistakes as part of the learning process, which honestly made the whole experience more fun.
It's like that saying, mistakes are proof that you're trying. Maybe we should be celebrating the fact that we're putting ourselves out there and learning instead of beating ourselves up.
I love that.
Wow.
But it's not just about what's going on in our heads, right? The situation we're in, the context, plays a huge role too.
Yeah, like failing to parallel park is one thing, but failing to land a plane,
Yeah,
that's a whole other level of consequence.
exactly. Edmondson gives this framework for analyzing the context, basically looking at two things: how much is known and what's at stake.
So, is it a routine task, something with some variables, or something totally new and unknown? And are the stakes high or low?
Exactly. She tells this story about Jay, this handyman who got injured using an angle grinder.
Ooh, that sounds rough.
He was so used to using the tool that he skipped his normal safety precautions.
Yeah.
Totally preventable accident.
It shows how, even when we're in familiar situations, we can't just zone out and go on autopilot.
Right, we have to stay aware of the context and what could go wrong.
And sometimes the context goes beyond the immediate situation, like the Dasani water launch in the UK. Remember that one?
Oh yeah, Coca-Cola just assumed their hit American product would translate perfectly.
But they totally missed the cultural differences.
Big misstep. It shows how important it is to understand the culture, the social aspects, even the politics, all the things that can affect our actions and decisions.
Okay, so we've got our mindset and the external context. But what about when we're in those big systems where our actions can have like ripple effects we don't even see coming?
That's where systems thinking comes in.
It's like that butterfly effect, right? A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and then,
Tornado in Texas. Well, maybe not that extreme, but the idea is similar. Edmondson uses a business school exercise called the beer game. You have people managing different parts of a beer supply chain.
sounds fun.
Right. But even with stable customer demand, the decisions they make within that system often lead to chaos and huge cost overruns.
So like if one person orders way too much beer, it screws everything up down the line.
Exactly. And the crazy part is people often blame the customer for the problems, even though the customer's demand is actually really predictable.
It really shows how our actions can have these unintended consequences that we don't always see coming, and how important it is to understand how everything's connected.
We may not be running beer factories, but we're all part of different systems. Even thinking about those systems in basic ways can help us make smarter choices and avoid those, negative domino effects.
It reminds me of those quick fixes that seem like a good idea at the time but end up making things worse in the long run. What does Edmondson call it? Fix that fails.
Exactly. She uses the example of nurses developing workarounds to deal with inefficient hospital procedures.
Which, I get it. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
Sure, but while those workarounds were effective in the moment, they were masking the real problems, and that actually stopped any real improvements from happening.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg, right? You're not dealing with the real issue.
Exactly. And it highlights how important it is to not just react to problems as they pop up, but to try to find those points in the system where we can actually make lasting change. But we'll dive deeper into that in part two. It's not just reacting, it's thinking ahead, like playing chess, not checkers.
Ooh, I like that analogy. So speaking of systems, Edmondson talks about building this healthy failure culture.
Absolutely. It's this idea that some environments are actually better at handling mistakes and then using those mistakes to grow.
So it's not like that blame and shame environment where everyone's terrified of messing up.
Exactly. In those kinds of places, people hide their errors, which means nobody learns from them.
Yeah, that doesn't sound very productive. So how do we actually create a healthy failure culture? What does that look like in real life?
Well, there are a few key things. Psychological safety is huge. It's creating a space where people feel comfortable admitting their mistakes, asking for help, sharing ideas without being afraid of getting punished or ridiculed.
It's like that feeling you have with close friends. You can be yourself even when you're not, perfect.
Exactly. And leaders, they have a big role in creating this kind of environment. They need to be vulnerable themselves, admit their own mistakes, and encourage open communication.
So it's not about pretending you have all the answers, but showing that it's okay to not know everything and to ask for help when you need it.
Exactly. Another crucial piece is open communication, making sure information flows freely, both ways.
So no more silos. Everyone has access to what they need.
Right. And it also means having systems for reporting errors and even your misses.
Wait, doesn't that sound like, I don't know, encouraging people to snitch on each other?
Not at all. It's about learning from those close calls before they turn into big problems. The aviation industry is a great example. They have these really sophisticated systems for reporting and analyzing near misses.
Makes sense. It's like those warning lights on your car's dashboard, right? Alerting you to potential problems before your engine explodes or something.
Exactly. And finally, a healthy failure culture celebrates intelligent failures.
Ah, those good ones, right. Where we're pushing the limits and trying new stuff.
Yep. 3M, the company that makes Post-it notes, is a great example. They've always encouraged experimentation and rewarded their employees for taking risks, even when those risks didn't always work out.
And they came up with some pretty cool stuff. It shows that sometimes those failures are what lead to the most interesting discoveries.
Absolutely. They even have a heroic failure award to recognize those valuable lessons learned from projects that didn't quite reach their goals.
That's awesome. It's like saying, hey, you gave it a shot, you missed, but we learned something from it, so good job.
Exactly. It's about reframing failure. Changing it from something scary into something to be learned from and celebrated.
Okay, this all sounds great in theory, but what about those of us thinking, how do I actually build this culture where I work?
It starts small. You can't just flip a switch and change everything overnight. But you can start modeling vulnerability, encourage open conversations, and celebrate those intelligent failures.
And ask different questions. Instead of who messed up, ask, what can we learn from this?
Exactly. It's about changing the mindset from punishment to learning, from fear to curiosity.
Okay, so we've got the healthy failure culture part down, but what about those personal blind spots that can trip us up? Edmondson spends a lot of time on self-awareness and how it's crucial for failing well.
She has a whole chapter on it. It's about recognizing that how we think really shapes how we deal with setbacks, understanding our own tendencies, and whether those tendencies are helping or hurting us.
I know I have certain patterns, like when I make a mistake, I either get defensive or I completely shut down and just avoid dealing with it.
Totally normal reactions. And they tie into what she calls non-learning theories in use. Basically, these are beliefs and behaviors that protect our egos, but stop us from actually learning from what happened.
So it's like those mental scripts we run on autopilot. Things like, I'm not good at this, or it's all their fault, or
I should have known better. Yep, all that. They might make us feel better in the moment, but they stop us from really seeing the situation clearly and learning from it.
Okay, so how do we, become aware of those scripts and actually break free from those patterns?
It starts with just noticing them. When you mess up, pay attention to those automatic thoughts. Are you blaming others, minimizing your role, making excuses?
Got it. Notice the pattern. But then what? How do we rewrite the script?
Well, Edmondson shares a powerful story about Ray Dalio, the guy who founded one of the most successful hedge funds in the world. Early in his career, he made this huge bet on the economy. And
It didn't go well.
he lost almost everything and was publicly humiliated. But instead of letting it crush him, he used it as a chance to grow.
So he turned what could have been a career-ending failure into a launching pad.
Exactly. He realized his arrogance, his need to be right, was holding him back. So he built a system for getting feedback, challenging his assumptions, and accepting that he could be wrong.
That's a powerful story. It shows how those huge setbacks can sometimes lead to the biggest growth.
Absolutely. And another trap to watch out for is confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias. That's where we only look for information that supports what we already believe, right?
Right, and ignore anything that contradicts it, like those blinders they put on horses, so they only see straight ahead.
Yeah, okay, I see the problem with that.
It can be dangerous because it stops us from seeing the whole picture and making smart choices. Like Edmondson points to the 2008 financial crisis.
A lot of people miss the warning signs with that one.
Many experts clung to their models, even though there was all this evidence that the housing market was in a bubble. Their confirmation bias blinded them.
It shows that even really smart people can fall for that trap. So how do we fight it? I know I can get stuck in my own ways sometimes. How do we become more open to different ideas and challenge our own assumptions?
Well, for starters, we need to develop a healthy skepticism. Question our own assumptions and any information that seems to confirm what we already believe.
So question everything, even stuff we're sure about.
Exactly. And try to find evidence that might actually prove us wrong.
Yeah, that sounds uncomfortable, but I guess it's important to get out of those echo chambers we create for ourselves.
It is. And another strategy: surround yourself with people who aren't afraid to disagree with you.
Those friends who will tell it to you straight, even if it's not what you want to hear.
Exactly. They're super valuable because they can help you see things from different perspectives and point out your blind spots.
Okay, that's good advice. Now let's talk about ambiguous threats.
Ooh, those are tricky. It's like that feeling you get in a horror movie when you know something bad is about to happen, but
But you don't know what or when.
exactly. And in real life, those subtle signals can be just as dangerous because we tend to ignore them.
Edmondson talks about the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, right? There were a bunch of warning signs beforehand. Equipment malfunctions, weird pressure readings, even concerns raised by workers.
But they were all dismissed. It's a tragic example of how focusing on blaming individuals and ignoring those early warnings can lead to catastrophe.
Okay, so how do we get better at spotting and responding to those subtle cues?
First, we need to just be more aware that problems might be brewing, paying attention to anything that feels off, even if we can't put our finger on exactly what it is.
So trusting our gut.
Yes. And creating a culture where people feel safe speaking up about their concerns, even if they don't have all the answers.
So it's okay to say, hey, I'm not sure what's going on, but something feels weird.
Absolutely. It's way better to raise a flag early than to wait until it's too late.
Once we've spotted a potential problem, then it's about assessing the situation, gathering info, and figuring out what to do.
And Edmondson talks about this crucial period. She calls it the recovery window. It's that time between when we notice a potential problem and when it becomes unavoidable.
So it's about acting fast, getting info, and coming up with a plan to reduce the risk.
Exactly. And it's about giving people the power to take action, to escalate concerns, and make decisions based on what they know.
It reminds me of those emergency procedures you learn, like stop, drop, and roll, or knowing where the nearest exit is. Having a plan so you can react quickly when things go wrong.
Exactly. Edmondson actually suggests a specific strategy for this: catch and correct.
Catch and correct. What's that?
It's about creating systems where people can easily identify potential problems and then fix them before they get bigger. Like Toyota's famous and-on cord system. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, it's that cord anyone on the assembly line can pull if they see a problem.
Right. Pulling that cord stops the whole production line until they figure out the issue. It's a big symbol of their commitment to quality. They recognize that even small errors can snowball if they aren't dealt with immediately.
It's like a built-in safety net to keep small problems from turning into disasters.
Exactly. Another example is rapid response teams in healthcare. These are teams of specialists ready to respond if a nurse has a concern about a patient.
So even if the nurse isn't sure what's wrong, they can call for backup.
Exactly. It's about empowering them to speak up and creating a system that takes those concerns seriously.
It's like avoiding those what-if moments that can keep you up at night.
Totally. Okay, so now let's talk about learning from our mistakes. It's not enough to just recognize and respond to failures. We have to actually figure out what we can learn from them.
Right. But our brains are kind of wired to avoid and downplay failure. So learning from it can be tough. Where do we even start?
Edmondson points out a few challenges. First, we might not even realize that a failure's happened, especially in those big complex systems where it's hard to connect the dots. We might blame outside factors instead of taking responsibility.
It's like that saying, everyone thinks they're a good driver. We tend to overestimate ourselves and underestimate our role in things going wrong.
Exactly. Another challenge is that even when we see a failure, we might not take the time to really reflect on it.
Yeah, we're so busy moving on to the next thing.
We don't stop to analyze what happened and think about what we could do better next time.
It's like trying to run a marathon without ever stretching or drinking water. You might keep going for a while, but
Right,
eventually.
you burn.
Exactly. And then, even if we do have time to think about it, our egos can get in the way. It's hard to admit we were wrong, especially to other people.
It's totally natural to want to protect ourselves, but that can stop us from learning and growing. So how do we get past these challenges and actually get better at learning from failure?
Yeah, how do we do that?
Well, Edmondson has a few suggestions. First, build in systems and routines for reflection.
So making time to actually think about what happened, what worked, what didn't, and why.
Right. It's like watching game film after a match. You can see what you did well, what you need to work on, and how to improve your strategy.
Okay, that makes sense. Turning those oops moments into learning moments.
Exactly. Another thing is to create a culture of psychological safety where people feel okay sharing their mistakes without being afraid of blame.
We were talking about that before, building that trust and openness where people feel comfortable being vulnerable.
Right. It's about creating a judgment-free zone, focusing on the learning and recognizing that everyone makes mistakes.
And the last one, growth mindset.
Yes. Seeing mistakes as stepping stones, not roadblocks.
Okay, now this might sound a little weird, but Edmondson also talks about keeping a failure journal. Is that really necessary? I mean, who wants to spend time dwelling on their mistakes?
It might feel counterintuitive, but there are some real benefits. First, it forces us to slow down and actually think about what happened.
So instead of just brushing it off, we actually process it.
Right. And second, it helps us see patterns in our mistakes. Are we always making the same kinds of errors? Are there certain situations that lead to more mistakes?
It's like those fitness trackers that show you data about your sleep or how much you're moving around, right? You might not realize you're not sleeping enough until you see it in black and white.
Exactly. And lastly, keeping a journal creates a record of what you're learning. You can see how far you've come, how much you've improved.
So it's like a progress report, but for our failures.
Exactly. It turns those oops moments into data points that we can use to do better next time.
I like that. Okay, journaling can be a good personal tool, but Edmondson also talks about sharing our mistakes with other people. That can be scary though, right? Nobody likes to admit they messed up, especially at work.
It's definitely a challenge, but sharing those failures in the right way can be super helpful for everyone.
So how do we do that? How do we share our mistakes without feeling like we're, painting a target on our backs?
Well, focus on what you learned, not on blame or shame. Emphasize how others can benefit from what happened to you.
So turning that oops moment into a teachable moment.
Exactly, and be specific. Don't just say, I messed up. Give details. Explain what happened, what went wrong, and what you did differently.
Okay, so context and actionable insights.
Right. And finally, be humble. Admit you're not perfect and that you're still learning.
So basically, hey, I'm human, I made a mistake, but here's what I learned.
Perfect. Now, sharing failures can be even harder in places where there's a culture of blame and punishment.
Yeah, admitting you messed up can feel like career suicide in some places.
It can. But even in those environments, there are things you can do to make it more open and focused on learning.
How do you change those deep-rooted patterns?
Well, the leaders, they need to show vulnerability. They have to be willing to admit their own mistakes and talk about them openly.
So leading by example, showing everyone it's okay to be human.
Exactly. It sends a powerful message. Learning is more important than blame.
And that can trickle down to the rest of the organization.
Right. If the boss can admit they messed up, it makes everyone else feel safer doing the same. And organizations can create systems for reporting errors and near misses.
We talked about that before, right? Those systems have to be confidential, not used to punish people.
Exactly. The goal is to find weaknesses and improve things, not to point fingers.
And the last one, celebrate those intelligent failures.
Those are the ones that come from taking smart risks, experimenting, pushing boundaries.
Right, the ones that often lead to breakthroughs.
Yes. Celebrating them shows that the organization values learning and growth, even when things don't go perfectly.
It creates an environment where people feel safe, trying new things, innovating, and learning from their mistakes.
Exactly. Now, let's talk about another crucial part of failing well: perseverance. It's not enough to just learn from mistakes. We also need to be resilient, to bounce back from setbacks and keep going.
So it's not just about learning, but about having the guts to keep trying, even when it's tough.
Exactly. Edmondson highlights grit, that combination of passion and perseverance. It's what helps us achieve those long-term goals.
So it's that fire in your belly that keeps you going, even when you hit roadblocks.
Exactly. She shares stories of people who faced huge challenges but kept going and ultimately succeeded. Like Sarah Blakely, the woman who founded Spanx.
Oh yeah, those things.
She got rejected constantly when she was starting out, but she kept believing in her idea. And look at her now, billion-dollar company.
Wow, that's amazing. It shows that believing in yourself can pay off, even when things seem impossible.
And then there's James West, the guy who invented the electric microphone. He dealt with racism and discrimination his whole career, but never gave up on his passion for science.
These stories are so inspiring. They show the power of resilience, of staying true to your vision, even when things are tough.
Absolutely. But while it's important to persevere, it's also important to know when to change course.
So knowing when to hold them and knowing when to fold them.
Exactly. It's about recognizing when something just isn't working and being willing to adjust, even if it means giving up on something you love.
That can be really hard, though. How do we know when it's time to let go?
Edmondson gives us a few questions to ask. Is this a temporary problem or a sign that something's fundamentally wrong? Have I gathered enough info to make a good decision? What'll it cost me to keep going this way? And what are the potential benefits of trying a different approach?
Okay, those are good questions. They help you step back and make a decision based on facts, not emotions.
Exactly. And sometimes changing direction can lead to even bigger success. Remember Rene Redzepi, the chef from Noma?
Yeah, no was that super famous restaurant, right?
It was, but they were struggling financially. So Redzepi did a complete overhaul of the menu. He made it more experimental, focused on seasonal ingredients.
So he took a risk and turned a crisis into a chance for something new.
Exactly. It not only saved the restaurant, but also led to a whole new level of creativity.
Wow, that's so cool. Sometimes the best way to deal with a setback is to just try something completely different.
Absolutely. Another great example is Rovio Entertainment, the company behind Angry Birds. They couldn't catch a break with their mobile games, then bam, Angry Birds.
Talk about a game changer, literally.
It went from a struggling company to multi-billion-dollar success.
So the takeaway here is to be open to change, to try new things, and be ready to let go of ideas that aren't working, even if we really love those ideas.
Absolutely. And that brings us to apologizing.
Wait, apologizing. How does that fit into all this?
When we screw up and hurt someone, a genuine apology can be huge for fixing relationships and rebuilding trust.
So it's not just about learning from our mistakes, but about acknowledging how our actions affect others.
Exactly. Edmondson talks about saying you're sorry, expressing regret, and taking responsibility.
And making things right.
Right, trying to fix what you broke. She also emphasizes that a good apology isn't about making excuses or downplaying the impact of what you did. It's about admitting you caused pain and truly wanting to make things better.
So sincerity and ownership. But what about forgiveness?
That's the other half of the equation. When someone hurts us, it can be hard to let go of that hurt.
Especially if it's something big.
Absolutely. And Edmondson acknowledges that forgiveness is a complicated process. There's no right way to do it.
So you got to find what works for you.
Exactly. But she does have a few insights. First, forgiving someone doesn't mean saying what they did was okay. It's about letting go of anger and resentment.
So it's not condoning the behavior, it's freeing yourself from those negative feelings.
Right. And it doesn't mean forgetting. We might never forget what happened, but we can choose to not be bitter and move on.
So acknowledging the past, but not letting it control us.
Exactly. And lastly, forgiveness isn't always easy. It can take time, work, even therapy to process the hurt and get to a place of forgiveness.
It's a journey.
It is. But it can be a really worthwhile journey. Okay, now for something that might seem totally crazy, Edmondson actually talks about celebrating failure.
Celebrating failure. Seriously, why would we do that?
I know it sounds counterintuitive, but there are good reasons. First, it normalizes failure. It reminds us that everyone messes up, it's part of life. And it's okay to not be perfect.
So taking the sting out of it a little.
Exactly. And it can encourage people to take risks and be more innovative. If we're terrified of failing, we're less likely to try new things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Nobody wants to stick their neck out if they're going to get ridiculed for making a mistake.
Right. And celebrating failure actually creates opportunities for learning.
So turning those oops moments into aha moments.
Exactly. When we're open about our mistakes, we can all learn from them.
Edmondson gives some good examples of organizations that do this. Like the Failure Institute, they host events where people share their biggest failures and what they learned.
Sounds like a support group for screw-ups.
Right. And then there's IDEO, the design firm. They have failure parties to celebrate projects that didn't work out but taught them valuable lessons.
It's about recognizing that even when we fail, there's something to be gained.
Okay, but what about perfectionism? Isn't that kind of the opposite of celebrating failure?
It can be a huge roadblock, for sure. In a world that's obsessed with achievement, it's easy to fall into that perfectionism trap, striving for this impossible standard of being flawless.
It's like chasing a rainbow, you can never actually reach it.
Exactly. And Edmondson points out that perfectionism can be really harmful. It can lead to anxiety, procrastination, even burnout.
It's like trying to squeeze into a dress that's way too small. It's not going to be fun, and you're just going to end up feeling bad about yourself.
Exactly. So how do we fight that urge to be perfect all the time?
Yeah, how do we do that? I can definitely be a bit of a perfectionist sometimes.
Well, Edmondson has some ideas. Challenge those all or nothing thoughts. The if I'm not perfect, I'm a total failure kind of thinking. It's about accepting that there's a middle ground. You can aim for excellence without needing to be flawless.
So it's okay to be good enough sometimes.
Exactly. And another thing, focus on progress, not perfection.
So celebrating the small wins along the way.
Yes. It's about recognizing how much you're growing and remembering that even mistakes can teach you valuable stuff. And last but not least, practice self-compassion.
Self-compassion. So basically, being nice to ourselves.
Exactly. It's about treating yourself with kindness and understanding. We're all human, we all screw up, and our worth isn't based on our achievements.
So cutting ourselves some slack when we mess up.
Yes. Okay, now let's shift gears and talk about pivoting.
So knowing when to change course.
Right. It's about recognizing when what you're doing isn't working and being open to adjusting. Even if it means ditching a project or idea that you really love.
That's one of the hardest things to do. Admitting that something you put your heart and soul into is just not working.
It can be incredibly tough, especially when you've invested so much time, energy, and passion into something.
So how do we let go? How do we say goodbye to those ideas that aren't working anymore?
Well, Edmondson suggests a few things. First, acknowledge those sunk costs, the time, energy, maybe money you've already put in.
The things you can't get back.
Exactly. But focusing on those can actually stop you from making a smart decision about the future.
So what's done is done, and we need to focus on what's best going forward.
Right. Second, get feedback from people you trust. Colleagues, mentors, friends, family, people who can give you an honest opinion.
So a reality check from people who aren't, emotionally invested in the idea.
Exactly. And lastly, reframe the experience as a learning opportunity. Think about what you gained from this project, what skills you developed, and how you can apply those lessons in the future.
So turning that failure into a stepping stone.
Exactly. It's not about dwelling on what went wrong. It's about using the experience to grow. Now, pivoting can be especially tough when it comes to creative endeavors, like starting a business or making art.
Yeah, those are things that are really personal, where you put a lot of yourself into them.
Exactly. And Edmondson emphasizes the importance of separating your identity from your work. You are not your successes, and you're also not your failures.
So even if your business fails, it doesn't mean you're a failure as a person.
Exactly. Your worth is inherent. It doesn't depend on external achievements. And this distinction can be really helpful when you're trying to pivot. It allows you to let go of those ideas or projects that aren't working without feeling like you're losing a part of yourself.
So you can detach from the outcome and focus on the learning process.
Exactly. And remember, pivoting isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength and adaptability.
It's like that quote, "The only constant is change." Being able to adapt is crucial for success.
Now, there's another aspect of failing well that we haven't touched on yet. Asking for help.
Oh yeah, that can be a tough one. Especially for those of us who like to, do everything ourselves.
I hear you. But Edmondson argues that asking for help is actually a sign of strength, not weakness. It shows that you're self-aware, that you recognize your limitations, and that you're willing to learn from others.
So it's about being humble,
Mm-hmm.
right? Admitting that you don't have all the answers.
Exactly. And when we ask for help, we open ourselves up to new perspectives, new ideas, and new solutions that we might not have considered on our own.
It's like that saying, two heads are better than one. Collaboration can lead to breakthroughs.
Exactly. But knowing when and how to ask for help can be tricky.
Yeah, what are some tips for doing that effectively?
Edmondson highlights a few key points. First, be specific about what you need help with. Don't just say, I need help. Explain the problem clearly and outline what kind of support you're looking for.
So instead of saying, I'm drowning, say, can you throw me a life preserver?
Exactly. Second, identify the right people to ask. Who has the expertise, experience, or resources that you need?
So finding those people who can actually provide the help you need.
Right. And lastly, be prepared to reciprocate. Offering help to others is a great way to build relationships and create a culture of mutual support.
So it's about give and take, creating a community where everyone supports each other.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important aspect of failing well, building a support network.
So those people who have your back when things get tough.
Exactly. Edmondson emphasizes the importance of having people you can turn to for advice, encouragement, and maybe even a shoulder to cry on when you need it.
It's like having a team of cheerleaders in your corner, cheering you on even when you stumble.
Exactly. And these people can be friends, family members, colleagues, mentors, or even people you connect with online. The key is to cultivate relationships with people who believe in you, support your goals, and are willing to be honest with you, even when it's hard.
So those people who will tell you the truth, even if it's not what you want to hear.
Exactly. Because sometimes we need that tough love to help us see things more clearly and make better decisions.
It's like having a mirror that reflects back not just what you want to see, but what you need to see.
Absolutely. And Edmondson also highlights the importance of seeking out diverse perspectives, surrounding yourself with people who come from different backgrounds, have different experiences, and see the world in different ways.
So getting out of your own bubble.
Exactly, because when we expose ourselves to different viewpoints, we challenge our own assumptions, broaden our horizons, and open ourselves up to new possibilities. And that's really what failing well is all about, isn't it? It's about being open to learning, to growing, to evolving. It's about embracing the unknown, accepting that we don't have all the answers, and having the courage to keep moving forward even when we stumble. It's about taking those experiences and using them to, fuel your growth.
I like that. Even when an idea doesn't pan out, there's still something to learn. If you look at it the right way, I mean. It's not about dwelling on the failure. It's about taking those lessons and applying them to future projects.
Exactly. And as we wrap up our deep dive here, I think one of the biggest takeaways is this. Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's actually a part of it.
It's like that Thomas Edison quote, right?
Yeah.
I haven't failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work.
Exactly. And all those failures led him to the light bulb. And that's what this book is really all about. We need to change how we see failure. See it as part of growth, part of innovation, part of, living a more fulfilling life.
We've covered so much in this deep dive. Different types of failure, building self-awareness, systems thinking, creating a healthy failure culture.
Learning from mistakes, bouncing back from setbacks, apologizing, even celebrating those intelligent failures.
It's a lot, but the key is to start small. Find what works for you, and remember, failing well is a process. It's not something you achieve overnight.
Absolutely. And it's not just about external success, it's about becoming more resilient, more adaptable, more innovative in everything we do.
It's about embracing those imperfections, learning from our mistakes, and using those experiences to evolve and grow.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up, think about one or two of the strategies we've talked about and try them out. Experiment a little.
What's one small step you can take today to change your mindset, create a more supportive environment, or just get more comfortable with the idea of failing?
Maybe start a failure journal or have a conversation with your team about a recent setback. Focus on what you learned instead of who's to blame.
Remember, failure is not the opposite of success. It's a step on the path to success.
And like Amy Edmondson says, the only true failure is the failure to learn.
So go out there, embrace the right kind of wrong, and keep learning, growing, and evolving. And for anyone who wants to explore this topic even further, we highly recommend checking out Edmondson's book, Right Kind of Wrong: The Science of Feeling Well. It's full of great stories, research-backed strategies, and thought-provoking questions.
And until next time, keep diving deep.